Just because you haven't doesn't mean you can't. 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 My name is Mr. 2020. You are listening to the Power of Imagination podcast. And I want you to start imagining something. First, I want you to accept something as true, which means you got to imagine this is actually how things are. Just because you haven't doesn't mean you can't. You know, babies, I love babies. They're just so much fun. I love mommies and babies and grandmas and grandpas and cats and dogs. And I noticed with babies, when the first grandchild was born, the first grandchild was trying to walk before it could stand. It was making these movements, these crisscrossy movements with her arms and with her legs. And I remember going, wow, she's trying to walk before she can stand. Some of the other big people around me, the grumps, they thought that's just a weird way of putting it. And I said, just watch her. Right? She's trying to walk before she can stand. In other words, she's exploring instead of being boring. And a lot of people, they settle for boring. A lot of people, they settle for bystander. A lot of people settle for just getting mad because nothing is happening. And that's the big phrase today. Mr. 2020, nothing is happening. And I'll ask, have you changed? Neville Goddard teaches us there's no one to change but self. No one comes to me unless I call him. You attract what you are, not what you want. And so we made up something called identity-based-manifesting.com. We made up something called manifestingmasterycourse.com. Those are the two big cornerstones, kids. But I seem to digress. Just because you haven't doesn't mean you can't. See, here's what I'd suggest doing. Explore a little bit each day of what you haven't done. Just a tiny little bit. Just because you haven't doesn't mean you can't. I did my recent lesson with Alessandra, my opera coach, and we were exploring ranges that I've never gone to before, and parts of my face and beingness that I have never sung from before, and it was so much fun. Just because I haven't sung from there doesn't mean I can't. When you settle for the excuses that you made yesterday, today, you're just digging it deeper. And I want you to soar higher instead of digging it deeper. I want you to dive deeper, soar higher. I've been saying that for years. Just because you haven't doesn't mean you can't. What if you did that? So we'll do the Manifesting Mastery course story real quick. If you came to Australia for 90 days on a visitor visa and stayed in our little cottage out back, and you saw me for the amount of time it takes to drink one cup of coffee, about the time of a podcast, I would share something with you very systematically, very structured, in a fun way. 90 days of, today I want you to ponder and play with this. See ya. Today I want you to ponder and play with this. See ya. Day 3. Hey, today I want you to ponder and play with this. See ya. Tiny little bits. Just because you haven't played with those little tiny bits doesn't mean you can't change your entire life. Because it's these little tiny steps that make the massive difference. Like just deciding to accept something as true. Like, just because I haven't doesn't mean I can't. The little one couldn't walk. She couldn't stand. And yet she's playing. And she's walking and talking all over the world now. But I seem to digress. Number 2, identity-based-manifesting.com. This is key. If you're trying to change something out there, nothing is happening, right? Or, I just can't get off my ass and do it, right? If you're trying to change stuff, if you're trying to change activity, before you change who you are, you're going to struggle. The secret to struggle is try to change stuff out there or what you do without changing who you are. You got to change who you are first. Happy Loving Teacher can't help but make this podcast up. Happy Loving Teacher can't help but go 3.9 million listens. That's pretty good, but it's nowhere near enough. We still haven't made the splash that I want to make. And just because I haven't doesn't mean I can't. So I invite you, dive in, dive deeper, soar higher. Make some investments in you. If you want to invest in you and support the project, I just gave you 2 ideas. We got other bits, but make sure you do those. Meanwhile, make it your mantra, just because I haven't doesn't mean I can't. And let's imagine up something yummy as we go into the silence. So do you want tomorrow to be different than yesterday? A lot of people, they honestly expect tomorrow to be like today. You got to change who you are now. And I invite you to become an explorer. I invite you to become an investor. Those are 2 of my most treasured states. If you've been around us for a while, you notice we just keep exploring. And we're never boring. And we're always investing our time, our money, our imaginal acts. You've seen the transformations. You've read the success stories. And I invite you to dive deeper, to soar higher. And Laurel, welcome to Remarkable. What a yummy gift I got to wake up to. We'll hear you on the call shortly. I think we've had like 4 or 5 new people sign up this month. Maybe last 6 weeks, something like that. Can you imagine my smiles? Have a lovely day. See ya.